Last week's Republican presidential debate saw a smaller field battle it out on stage for the GOP nomination. One candidate who has yet to make the RNC debates and register in many polls is Ryan Binkley, CEO of Mergers and Acquisitions investment bank Generational Group and pastor at Create Church in Richardson, Texas, which I may add is a city name I very much approve of. Joining me from the campaign trail to discuss his 2024 presidential bid and why he still believes he stands a chance at the GOP nomination is Ryan Binkley. Ryan, thank you for joining me here today.
Well, it's great to be with you. Thank you for having me, and really looking forward to our time together.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. And let's get right into it. For the first time in history, the Speaker of the House of Representatives has been removed. You've spoken in your campaign a lot about the divide in this country. How does the vote to remove Representative Kevin McCarthy as Speaker affect, if at all, divisions that are already in place?
Well, this is really a problem with our whole country. You know, we are known right now, I think, more than any other time in my lifetime, to be known as the nation that's divided. I think I've seen poll after poll that says, you know, when you ask people, how would you describe our country? The most recent one was divisive, and the other one had the word corrupted in it. And so division and corruption has been the two biggest words. And so this is just another element of us seeing how not only is our country divided, but our party is divided. And the Republican Party, you know, there's two major rifts within it. You know, you got kind of the populist rift, and you've got the traditional Republicans there as well. And our country is lacking vision. Our party is lacking vision. It's lacking leadership. And how do we move forward? And I really see this as a huge problem. I've got a lot of thoughts on McCarthy's leadership and what happened here this week. But at the end of the day, you know, I said last week, I said, listen, there's something before Congress right now, and it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to get together. They had 5 days last week to get together, come up with something, a small compromise. I mean, Republicans were asking for 2% of the overall budget. Come back with 1%. Come back with something. Democrats came back with zero. You know, we left with nothing. And because he made the worst decision, a continuing resolution to do nothing, that's the reason he got ousted. And so I think it's just indicative that the status quo is not going to get it done. I don't necessarily agree with the way it happened. I'm not saying I would have voted that way, but because we're in deep trouble financially, this is all starting to raise its ugly head.
Now, let me go off of that. You want to seek bipartisan solutions to problems. You put that on your campaign website. Various politicians have made similar promises. How will you be the one to bridge that divide and bring Americans together?
Well, we have to keep in mind, you know, the only person that really could have ended this, you know, budget debacle was President Biden. So the president of the United States holds that bully pulpit, holds that office to be able to look into a camera and speak to the American people about the status of our nation. And so most people don't know. You know, what they're doing is they're finding out about it now as they have inflation that's costing 30% more for rents, or, you know, gas prices, food prices up so high, or if you own a home and you're buying a home today, it's going to cost you $800 or $1,000 more a month today than it did 2 years ago for the same price home. So everybody's really feeling this now. But 5 months ago, when we launched our campaign, I was saying we need to balance the budget. We have to get back to this. But it's the job of the president to communicate to America the problem. We had about 68, young adults, college students at our campaign headquarters about 2-3 months ago. And I was asking them how many of them knew how much debt we had as a nation. Only one out of the entire group knew the debt we had. And if you don't know what it is, then you'll have no idea the impact that it has. And so as president, I'll communicate to America the status of our country, how well we're doing, why we need to make changes, and I'll communicate to them. And that will help them connect with their legislators and their senators on why we do need to make some small adjustments, because a little bit of adjustment will help our country be strong, and that's the way I lead.
So you think President Biden is solely responsible for not passing the budget? You don't think Congress has any blame at all?
No, it's not what I'm saying. You asked me what would I do as president. I think as Congress, obviously it's the job of Congress to, you know, they got the power of the purse. So I think if I go back to, Kevin McCarthy, you know, at the end of the day, you know, what his job was to do was to try and hold the line a little bit. Republicans have very little power right now, but the power we did have, he gave up. And so I think at the end of the day, the worst decision we could have had is just do a continuing resolution, just keep going down the road. I think Kevin's job should have been trying to convince America. I think he should have gotten to the camera and say, listen, here's why I'm going to do this. Hopefully we don't have to shut the country down. All I'm asking the Democrats to do is come to the table with something. They're coming together with nothing, meaning out of $6 trillion, they haven't found even a half of 1% or 1% they can cut. That's unacceptable. We're going bankrupt as a nation. I would have done all that, and I would have done it months ago. So it's, if you're Speaker of the House, that's one thing. If you're leading Congress, that's one thing. But the president has an ability and a position to do something that no other president does and no other leader in Washington does, and that's communicate to American people and persuade people. I would say this, lead people to a logical conclusion of where we need to go. Because if you don't know that this debt has caused us to print money, and the printing of money causes inflation, and the inflation is what causes the Fed to raise rates to control inflation, which inadvertently kills jobs. And that's where we're at right now. We're in a slowing economy. You're a senior this year. Many people are going to come out of your school and they're going to be looking for jobs more than they were 3 years ago. Many of them are going to have delayed employment or underemployment, and they're going to feel it.
Now, we're going to get more into your economic agenda in just a little bit, but I want to touch upon something you said. You said you had a lot of young voters at your campaign. Sound like you said HQ, if I heard you correctly. Now, it's been reported that you have invested millions into your campaign. Still, you're not registering in many polls. So I want to ask, young voters traditionally don't turn out that much in elections. What would you say to them to go out and vote for you?
Well, right now, this whole election cycle, if we're not focused on the next generation, really we're wasting our time. At the end of the day right now, we're about to pass off your generation with probably $50 trillion in debt in the next 8 years. And this will paralyze us as a nation. We spend 8% of our money on interest payments right now. In 8 years from now, it'll be 14 to 15%. We do not have the money for that. So what I'm trying to do is pass this country off here in the next 10 years to a generation where we're financially sound, where we're leading well internationally, where we've actually desocialized healthcare. We brought that back in order, where we're doing something about the poverty crisis we have in urban America, which stems from a true lack of education with vocational skills, as well as preparing people for life after high school and college. So we're not preparing people in poor areas. And I have a movement that I want to start in that. I want to ask college students to help me do that, be a part of the solution. I'm asking college students, would you donate 5 hours a week, abandon politics, but join me in a movement to love your neighbor by volunteering 5 hours to mentor a 3rd through the 5th grader on how to read. Only 1 out of 6 urban American kids that are minorities are reading at the 8th grade reading level. In fact, across the board, it's only about 30% that are doing it. So we're really struggling as a nation. We've got to get back to volunteering, teaching kids how to read and write. I want to ask college students, if you want to change the culture of the country, change the life of a child, join me in a movement. And when we do this, I'm going to show you that us paying for your college tuition would be the worst decision we ever made for your long-term financial future. And I'm going to show you how to have a strong country again, and help me do this.
Correct. Did I hear you say paying for a college tuition is the worst decision in the country's future? Did you say that?
I did say that. I said that if we pay off everybody's college tuition, and we did that this year, what I'm saying is that would be one of the worst decisions we could make for our country's financial future and yours as well. And I could give you some thoughts on that. Because if we did it this year, then certainly you would agree that we need to do it next year. And then we need to do it the year after that. And so if we get into this cycle now of all we're doing is paying off people's college tuition, and then we're inadvertently giving donations to people that can afford to go to college, as opposed to those that go to vocational trade schools or other forms of education, or pursue, maybe they decide to pursue their own career right out of high school, then we're inadvertently setting up a system of failure. And what we're doing is we're gonna prop this system up on debt, and debt is what is destroying our country. The Bible says the borrower is a slave to the lender. And who are we borrowing money from? We're borrowing it from other nations. And right now we are $32 trillion in debt. And China's loaning money to other nations. We're borrowing money. We're going to be weaker and weaker every year if we keep on this cycle.
I appreciate the clarification. Now I want to go a bit into your history. You co-founded Create Church in Texas alongside your wife, Ellie. Religion and faith are large components of your campaign. You already referenced the Bible. As president, How would you balance the separation of church and state?
Well, right now, there is nothing in the Constitution that says, hey, church and state should be separated. Everybody needs to know that. What is in the Constitution is that we have a right of, spiritual expression and religion. It's a freedom of religion, not freedom from religion that's expressly written. What our founders didn't want, they didn't want a state religion. They didn't want there to be one church like there was over there in Britain. They didn't want us to have one church that was in charge of everything. They wanted everybody to be able to worship the way they wanted to. And so, I honor everybody regardless of whatever faith you have. I particularly have a faith in God and also as a Christian in Christ. That said, I'm not trying to make everybody believe the way I want to believe. Our founders did believe that. It's written all throughout our nation's history of people that did believe in God. And we're at a nation right now at a time of society where, a lot of people still do believe in God. I think it's 70 to 80% of people do believe in God. But many people are not necessarily actively practicing their faith. And that's okay. And many people are agnostic or atheist. And my thoughts are this: hey, let's be respectful to everyone, regardless of what you believe about faith. This is my main message. And if I share a message that Christ gave, the real message that he gave is this: love your neighbor. And so as I'm talking about turning back to God as a nation, what I'm saying is, yeah, should we look up and consider our ways? Should we wonder, hey, is it pleasing for us to allow destruction of our country even in the urban areas by allowing, drugs to be prolific, by allowing human trafficking to be prolific? I think these are things that we should look up and go, wow, I would agree with that. We need to stop this. We need to do more about it. But at the end of the day, the main message is to love. So that's what I'm saying. Can we all recognize, regardless of faith or no faith at all, that the poor need help, that kids in urban America need help and education, that we should do some things different by volunteering and helping those the most in need? And I think this: if we all focused on the most in need in society, our country would be better off. We would start a volunteer movement, a community service movement that could really change the culture of our country. And that's the way I would lead my expression of faith.
Now, I want to go a bit into your economic agenda. You say you want to help those who don't have as much money, who are poor, but you say you want to cut aspects of the budget that don't work, including Obamacare. So what would you say to those who are concerned that losing coverage would adversely affect them, especially if they don't have that much money that they're making?
Right. So, well, you have to look at the fundamentals of what Obamacare did and is doing right now. So basically what Obamacare does is it makes insurance more affordable for others at the expense of another group of people. So we have private insurers, today that's paying the largest majority share of all the expenses, really, when it comes down to the profit. What's making profit for insurance companies, healthcare providers, and as well as big pharma. They're making most of their profit off private insurance. And so as when we do this, we see that private insurers today are struggling. In fact, I've got over 300 employees, and they're paying $30,000 a year for insurance, and that's with probably about a $5,000 to $10,000 deductible. So you're looking at a group of people that's going, wow, I'm a young person. I've got a family. I've got one child. I'm 29 years old. Should I be spending $30,000 a year on insurance, or what if I just did it a different way? So what I'm talking about is we actually have to streamline and recognize what are the real problems with healthcare. And here's what the real problems are. We have got 40% higher inflation in healthcare than regular inflation for the last 20 years. So we have a system that is broken. Obamacare did not lower the cost of healthcare at all. It just moved it from one group to another. So now we've got a broken system. We have big pharma. The United States, we pay about 300% more than any other developed nation in the world on pharmaceutical drugs. And we do that because I think we've been bought off by big pharma. Most of our President Biden took $8 million from big pharma. President Trump took about $3 million. 2/3 of legislators have taken big money. And so we bought into the system. And here's how they get us. They get us because we give patent extensions more than any other nation on the blockbuster drugs. So we as a nation, the United States, basically we're subsidizing the rest of the world. So what would I do as president? I would streamline everything. I would allow small businesses to be able to compete and self-insure by grouping together with all the other small companies. I would allow a decentralization basically of the of the insurance market. In many states, there's only 2 or 3 major competitors of insurance. There ought to be dozens for you to choose from. It ought to be as easy for you to choose your medical provider for insurance as it is your car insurance. If you don't like your car insurance, you call and you cancel them and you get another one. That's how easy it should be. We have to put you back in charge again as the patient. This is the only thing we purchase where we don't ask how much does it cost when we go to the doctor's office anymore. We've been trained just to give them our card and we blindly go take these tests. And as a result, here's what's happened. We are not even in the top 20 across the world, not even in the top 20 in patient outcomes per dollar, meaning we spend more money than anybody, but we're not even in the top 20 in efficiency. So this is what's broken. So I've got to gut this, bring it back to market efficiency, bring price transparency, give you a reason to shop again, let you see what it costs when you go there, and actually give you the ability to compete and help. We can transform Medicare and Medicaid this way. So eventually your costs are going to come down, but it's not going to be because one group's comping you so you can have cheaper insurance.
Now, you've also blamed the country's economic woes on inflation and border security. Why do you feel those are the biggest factors impacting the budget, and what would you do to fix them?
Well, so keep in mind, these are 2 different issues really, but the inflation is as a result of poor fiscal policy. So fiscal policy is basically how much is Congress spending and how much are we bringing in as the government. So we are only bringing in about $4 trillion, a little over that every year, and we're spending about $6 trillion. So we're going to go in debt $2 trillion this year alone, and this is now dogpiling on our debt. So what causes inflation is how are we going to pay for that debt? Well, the Fed starts printing money in their little printing machine. By the way, I wish I had one of those printing machines in my garage. That'd be amazing. But anyway, they print money. And as the money supply increases and they flood the banks with more money, this is what happens. The cost of everything, it's like monopoly money dropping out of the sky. Everybody's walking around with more dollars. And this is what devalues our currency and causes inflation. So knowing what is actually devaluing the dollar is so important. The border security is a totally another topic.
I want to transition from that back to a little bit of your work. You want to promote a culture of adoption in America. It's my understanding that one of your children is adopted. What aspects of that process inspired you to make it an element of your platform?
Well, the most important thing that we can do is we can care for the next generation and care for people. I believe that life is important at every level. When you're a teenager, whether you're an infant, whether you're in the mother's womb. I am pro-life, and so I believe that life begins in the womb. Throughout Scripture and the Bible, it's mentioned oftentimes throughout that way. Jeremiah chapter 1, it mentions about a prophet named Jeremiah where God speaks and he says, I knew you before. This is amazing, before you were in your mother's womb. So obviously I believe that. Now, what do we got to do in our country? When Roe v. Wade was overturned, I also recognize that this is a very difficult issue. Nobody's heart changed when Roe v. Wade was overturned. Nobody changed their mind or their viewpoint on that. And now it's in the hands of the states. So what would I do as president? I would first of all empathize more. I would try and make sure that every young woman knew that if they're in the moment of crisis, that there's other options available to them. I would try and make sure that there's financial resources available to them as well. Many women have chosen a path of abortion because of the financial difficulty that they foresaw for that first year. There's a lot of organizations out there that do help in that area. I would try and make sure that awareness level goes up, trying to make sure men are responsible much more so than they are today, to start thinking about life and the consequences of sex outside of marriage. Where there's sometimes a consequence. Sometimes that is the birth of a child or a pregnancy. So I would try and make sure that people are responsible. And then I would try and say, listen, let's make adoption more affordable and accessible. Sometimes it can cost $25,000 to $30,000 a year just to have an adoption, not a year, I'm sorry, but to have an adoption period. We need to make that cheaper. Many people can't afford that. And then I want to do something with foster care system as well. That's really broken because when many kids age out of foster care, and they don't get adopted, there's maybe 10 and 12-year-olds that a lot of people, they just want infants that, they grow up in this system and then, they age out, they don't have resources, they don't have family connections to really help them propel in life. And I really want to do a better job saying, hey, can we start an adoption movement for people over 10? Let's make sure that everybody that's in foster care, if they want to have a home, they can have one. We did adopt our fifth child, and he is a beautiful, beautiful young man, and now he's 13. And obviously, he's changed our life in so many ways. It was in our heart to adopt many years before we did. But when we had the opportunity, we took it, and he's just been a perfect fit in our family. And I don't know how to say it other than God has a way of changing our hearts and lives through that beautiful moment of adoption. And I think if we inspired that more in America, that's what would happen. We could change this thought of life, and that's the way I would want to lead it.
Now, adoption, you allude to it, can cost thousands upon thousands of dollars for families. How would you try and reduce that? How would you try and reduce that as president?
I think just speaking to it's important. Right now, a lot of people give to churches and charities and different organizations for different reasons. Just making awareness known, is all of us should value life, but maybe you're not in a position where you can adopt, or you think you should, but maybe you could give to a nonprofit that does help people make it more affordable. And so I think just raising the awareness level is so important, and speaking to the value of it. And as we do that, then people would respond.
Now, one of your opponents in the Republican field, Vivek Ramaswamy, wants to expand the voting age unless citizens fulfill a national service requirement or pass a civics test. Is that something that you would support as president?
Well, specifically, I think he wanted to raise the voting age to what, 25 years
25.
old?
Yeah.
Yeah, unless you did these things. So, obviously, I think everybody should take a civics class in high school, and many of them do already. So the question is do they value it or do they remember it? That's the main thing. So they're already being taught that. Certainly, I do not feel like that we should expand the voting age, if that's the main question. So I think everybody's already taken these classes. Now, whether they value it and whether they remember it is another issue altogether. And I think that they should. But that said, the voting age is solid where it is. It's in our Constitution. So to support a constitutional amendment to change the voting age when, you can come out and start a company and have thousands of employees at 18, 19 years old. You can do a lot of things. You know what? I think you're old enough to vote. You're old enough to make a difference in society. You're making lifelong decisions at that age. My parents were married at the age of 18. They had my brother when they were 18 years old. So I think that we should not be infringing upon their right to vote
Let's talk
in
about
any respect.
Let's talk about the military. One of your goals is to ensure America's military is the most effective in the world. As Commander-in-Chief, what would be your policy for sending troops abroad?
Wow. Well, deterrence is such a strong word that has been used for decades with our U.S. military and with our country to prevent war. And so the only way to really make sure that war is prevented is understanding who the enemy is and who the people that are potential adversaries out there, what resources do they have, and why would they get in a conflict with somebody that they knew that could harm them as much or worse than they would you. And so we've used that deterrence oftentimes out throughout history. And whenever we show weakness in that, like President Biden did when he basically ran out of Afghanistan, as soon as he did that, that's when Russia decided to say, wow, this is going to be the type of leader he is. Let me see what I can take advantage of right now. So first of all, would make sure that we have a strong military. We have to be able to be strong from a defensive perspective. The best way to be strong is to have a strong energy policy, to be strong financially here as our country, and to have a strong military. And that's it. When our country is strong financially, economically, people start to pay attention. The reason China's not paying attention to us today is because our dollar is becoming weaker all the time. We're borrowing so much money. Chinese people are poor, but at the same time, their country has a much smaller debt to GDP ratio than we do. That's the reason they're able to loan money to other nations. They don't have the social programs that we have at the large extent. So at the end of the day, they're stronger when it comes to that. And their military is going to be outpacing ours if we don't make some key differences in the next decade or two. So we've got to recognize that this is important. And that's the way I would lead to make sure we have a strong defense. I would only put troops on the ground when and absolutely necessary, that I felt like it was vital to American interest. And then and only then when we had a strategic plan for victory and a strategic exit plan as well, then and only then.
Now, you mentioned the word deterrence, and that's a phrase that's thrown thrown around a lot in regards to nuclear weapons. As president, you would be in charge of the world's second largest nuclear arsenal, where a single warhead could kill hundreds of thousands of people. How would you approach that responsibility?
Well, the enormous responsibility that is, I need to make sure that one, we are have great counsel around us, great leaders around me, and then also, as a man of prayer, just making sure that we're being led. We have to be strong in every single way. Financially, we've got to be strong culturally as a nation. We've got to bring our strength back so these weapons are never used. As president, I would actually try and lead over time for a denuclearization plan. And that would be a God thing. That would be something that would take who knows when. But I could see the day to where there's no longer a need for nuclear weapons, and hopefully we could have a day of peace where these were not utilized, because in my mind they should never be utilized.
I know President Obama has gone on record saying he hopes for a nuclear-free world. It sounds like you agree with that.
In some ways, I would certainly like to have that. I know that's not going to happen without there being a true leader that really can lead to that. And it takes a different type of leadership as well in our world today to send a message that we believe that every nation should be in a fair place economically, a fair place strategically to be able to do business, and then that we see a desire for every nation to have peace and prosperity. The main thing that I would try and lead in is show that, we look at some of our adversaries of the past. You look at Japan, you look at Germany. These were two nations that were dead set on destroying America, and now are some of our biggest allies. So can hearts change on this? Sometimes we get a very myopic view that we never see that we could ever see that path. I'm just trying to pull back when I say that and say, listen, I can see a day when that could happen. Look at who some of our biggest allies are now. Would you have ever imagined that we'd be a strong ally with Germany? Would you have ever imagined we'd be a strong ally with Japan? So now we are. I could see a day where something significantly different could change.
Now let's delve into foreign policy, starting with Israel. Legislation has been introduced that would change the Israeli judiciary so that the Supreme Court cannot strike down government moves, which sparked protests from thousands who say the law threatens democracy. Proponents of the rule say the court currently has too much authority. You say you want to nurture U.S.-Israeli relations. What would be your message to Israeli officials as these protests continue?
Right now we have to just keep our message strong that we support Israel as an independent nation. I believe that they have the ability to make their laws and to govern their lives, and we are one of our strongest allies, and we're supporting them. Stand strong with democracy. Stand strong with things that really promote freedom. Every time they give opportunity for voices to be heard, they're going to be stronger in the long run. Protests are part of it. These are parts of the movement that have made some of our country some of the greatest moments when we've stood up for things that we stand for. Don't necessarily try and shut every voice down just because you may disagree with it. Let it be part of the process. That's what a true democracy does.
Now, is this a piece of legislation that you do support? Have you looked into it at all?
No, I have not looked at this particular one that you're referring to.
Now, I want to talk about NATO. You want NATO allies to allocate at least 2% of their GDP to military spending. How do you think you're going to be able to persuade the alliance to do so if elected president?
Well, at the end of the day, we are spending most of the money there right there in Ukraine, and the war that's on the front is in their backyard. So we hold most of the cards here as far as how we lead. I would definitely be leading everyone to be able to pay their fair share and say, listen, we're going to be making some strategic changes here in the short term, and you need to make sure you're paying your fair share. And so bottom line is it's simple as that. It's great leadership. It's going to take us, putting our money where our mouth is, and we cannot continue being the endless supply to Ukraine. At the same respect, I'm not going to let Putin just run all over Europe. And so we're going to be strong, and we're going to help lead this, I believe, quickly to a place of peace, a peace initiative that would allow everyone to kind of walk away at some point, feeling like that, a deal has been made, the nation and the region is stronger to where everybody can move on to some sort of pathway of prosperity.
Do you see this as realistic? Do you think everyone would agree to allocate that much to the alliance, to military spending?
I think they've already agreed to it, and they just need to be held accountable to it.
Now, you mentioned the war in Ukraine. You have called it illegal, and you've said you would allocate aid, but not indefinitely. How long would you support the war-torn country?
I would, as president, I would work immediately. I would gather some of the NATO leaders. I would gather Putin together, and I would start to talk to Zelensky as well. Let's get together and start working on a peace plan. What does this look like? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what we come up with. There is going to be some negotiated element to this. Without saying in details of what those would be or could be like, there's definitely parts where nobody's going to walk away a purely happy winner in this. The reason is that Russia is embedded in this war. Russia is dedicated. They don't have a thought for the countless lives that have been lost already. I think it's a minimum of 40,000. It's maybe the upwards of 200,000 lives that have been lost. They don't seem to, that's not something that's in their highest of concern. Our highest concern is to bring peace and strength to that whole area. We're not going to allow Putin to sit there and take over all of Ukraine. So what's going to be the next result? They do not want to be in a long-term war. It's not in their financial interest to be in a long-term war. At the same time, they have developed a pretty strong element of a stronghold there. So we have to bring some sort of peace to that region, and that's the way I would lead it. Get that done as soon as possible.
Now, my final set of questions may be something you're not necessarily used to, but bear with me. You say you would support former President Trump if he is the GOP nominee. I want to ask you, was there a policy during the Trump administration that you disliked?
Most of his policies I liked. When it came down to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, I liked. When it came time to him tried to do whatever he could to get some funding for the border, I liked. I like the fact that he moved the embassy to Israel. Supreme Court justice he picked. I think that was a good move to pick people that actually held to the Constitution as much as possible. There's many things that he did leadership wise that I feel like where he could have done different. Now, we'll say this on a policy perspective. The one big disagreement I have with him on policy is the way he led us financially. We went $7.5 trillion in debt underneath his leadership. So I would put together a budget. I would do it much different. And from an economic perspective, he was hoping that we could grow our way out of the problem that we had debt wise. We've never been able to grow our way out. That's just fallacy thinking that. The other thing leadership wise is that, during our greatest moment of crisis, I believe, during the COVID times, and then I would call it the summer of injustice when so many people were hurting and struggling from the racial injustice. There was just moments of leadership that could have been done quite a bit different. I think when we turned the pulpit over to Fauci to handle COVID, that was the wrong way to do it. It ended up being we didn't have the knowledge, the research in order to shut down our country. We should have never shut the country down. We should have never given away endless trillions of dollars without a mechanism to truly pay it back. I think that's truly what set us off and caused the inflation crisis that we're in today. So those are some of the things I would have done different.
And you mentioned the inflation crisis. You repeatedly refer to that throughout this interview. Is there a policy of President Biden, kind of reversing here, that you support?
No, I can't think of one thing he's done that I support, other than I read the news today. He's starting to build the wall. So I guess in that respect, I support that. The Inflation Reduction Act didn't reduce inflation at all. In fact, it increased inflation because it was basically just a big spending bill. And so at the end of the day, it didn't do anything to stop inflation. We have to recognize that there's only one really method and way to stop inflation today, and that's to break us off the spending habit that we're on. The only way to come out of this is to grow a little bit and to cut a little bit. We're going to have to be able to do both. It's called pruning. Our country has never seen a tree that needs to be pruned. We hang on to some dead limb with one leaf on it and go, that's amazing. Let's just keep it forever. So we've got to get to the place where we can cut some things that are inefficient, ineffective. We have to take a business person's approach to Washington, D.C., to every program, to everything we're spending money on. That's why I'm saying we have to make healthcare competitive again. We've got to be able to control the border. We got to be able to do some things significantly different than we're doing right now. Otherwise, our country's at risk financially. I really see this, that we're about to enter a stagflation time. If you go back 45, 50 years and you remember in the mid 70s, late 70s of what that was like when you had high inflation, you had high interest rates, and you had companies that were stagnant, and they called it stagflation. And that is the period that I see us heading in the next 3 to 6 months, 9 months. And there's no way out except for good leadership, beginning to cut things. And you got to start cutting wasteful spending. You got to start pruning again, and then you can lead your way through it.
And let's talk about a certain piece of merchandise that you've been promoting, the WTF hat. What was the inspiration for that?
I think I may have one in my office. You want me to find one real quick? Let's see if I do.
Yeah, let's do it.
I usually have a box somewhere. There's a few laying around here somewhere. But anyway, so the way to freedom was our founding message theme that I gave on our opening announcement night. It's like, we're so broken as a country. We've seen freedom really fall in our country. What have we seen freedom fall in? Freedom of the press. We've seen press be much different. We've seen big tech inhibit voice of free speech. We've seen the right to express ourselves in the last election being hit quite a bit hard. We've seen the freedom of commerce and trade be hit so much due to corruption, due to our debt. We've seen an overabundance of message of socialism and corruption now that's just kept us from, freeing our economy. And right now we're struggling. So our message really right out of the gate was, listen, it's economic freedom. It's freedom in urban America, because when we can start freeing urban America through a long-term plan of education and vocational trades, we're going to lift up urban America again. And it's a big problem because urban America is a huge part of our country and the Republican Party is non-existent. I mean, it's like we're sitting here as a country with 83% of our nation's population in big cities, and the Republican Party has lost 46 of the top 50 cities in the last election. So my message is, let's go revitalize urban America. Let's don't run from it. Let's revitalize it through vocational training, through community centers, through educational training with young people. Let's dig in there and just help people go to another level in life. So that is the way to freedom. And one of our young people, came to me one time and said, hey, what about, or one of my friends had this thought, what about this acronym WTF? And we thought about it, and I thought, you know what, it's an engaging moment, because what it does is it tells people, listen, a lot of people are asking this question about our country. What is going on? What in the world has happened? Or where's the freedom? What in the world? How have we gotten here? And so it's inspired to make a conversation happen. Have you ever said WTF about our country? Have you ever said what in the world's going on? And here's the way to freedom. It's a conversation starter to have a new path for the Republican Party, a new path to unify our country. Many people in our country are so divided, but I believe this: if we help the poor, we're fiscally strong, we come up with business solutions for healthcare, we secure the border, we offer a level of respect on the social agenda items that many people disagree on. We just try and find places of agreement. We can change the culture of our country together. We don't have to hate each other the level we do today. We can come up with legislation that works. It's going to take cooperative legislation to fix our biggest problems: healthcare and the border, economically, the budget. We cannot balance the budget without Democrats. It's going to take leadership. It's going to take us working together. Ronald Reagan spoke to this. He transcended his party in 1984, and he got 59% of the vote. Abraham Lincoln spoke to this. He said, a nation divided cannot stand. As president, I'm going to lead to try and unite our country, because we got every big problem I'm talking about: the budget, healthcare, inner city, urban America, jobs, inflation to the border, internationally as well. We can't solve unless we're unified as a country again, to where everybody sees, hey, I'm American first. And I want people to put their country before their party. And if we can do that, we'll lead well.
You mentioned, if I heard you correctly, you mentioned that voters weren't able to fully express themselves in the last election. What makes you say that?
Well, what I mean by that, they had limited information. There's no question big tech hid certain things about, like, Hunter Biden's laptop. There was certain information that was proliferated more, certain information that was hindered more. And so, whenever you start seeing this with big tech and media, it doesn't take a genius to, you can watch CNN and watch Fox News in the same day. You may think you're in two different countries. I mean, they report different news items that are totally different, with a different, different slant to them. So that's the way media is today. I think a freedom of expression in media is when it's not being filtered. We need to get back to that. There used to be like FCC requirements for this. Now everything is just, a free for all in opinion news, which is fine to some extent. But at the end of the day, I want people to make sure they have all the information, and none of it should be hidden. Some of these big oligopolies we have in big tech, with Google, if Google's hindering information and they're hindering information on YouTube, well, that needs to be cleaned up, or they need to be, broken up, one or the other. So these are the kind of things that I'm talking about.
The first election, the Iowa caucus, is coming up in roughly 3 months, and it's a relatively large Republican field. What would you like to say to all voters to go out and convince them to vote for you specifically come next year?
I want to just share, this vision that I shared just briefly a few minutes ago with our country, and go, do you like the vision we're going down and the two visions that are offered today? I mean, the vision Joe Biden is offering is one of more of a bigger government, socialistic type message, meaning that we're going to keep paying for everything. He's going to go $2 trillion in debt. It's something that just doesn't work. I mean, listen, it all sounds good till you got to pay for it. And then once you start looking at the cost of it and you recognize that it's also going to take away your freedoms, that's one vision. The other vision that we're seeing right now is it's a stronger movement to even right on the farther right end, meaning, you're hearing statements of, hey, I'm going to put the military in the border. I'm going to shoot anybody that comes across the border with drugs. Well, those are not, cartel king leaders coming across the drugs. They have basically manipulated people, threatened people's lives. Certainly they need to be arrested and certainly need to be held accountable. But there's a rhetoric that's a strong right rhetoric. And what I'm saying is this: we've got to recognize that our country's hurting. They're hurting financially. There's only one way out. It's wisdom and leadership financially. We have to understand the cost of a dollar. How is it important we save the dollar for the next generation? We've talked about that. We've also got to have wisdom and solutions for our economy. Right now, we have a socialized healthcare system in America. We may not have thought it was that. I remember a lot of people didn't want to think it's that, but it already is that, because we don't ask how much it costs when we go purchase it. It's the only thing you and I do. We don't ask anymore. And so my vision is transparency in healthcare, price visibility in healthcare, competition, patient-doctor relationships back, costs coming down, patients in charge of shopping again, and just true visibility. We're not allowing big pharma to control us. We're actually, competitive across the globe in pharmaceutical drugs. We're strong in energy. We're energy independent. My vision is to control the border, but we actually have to have funding for it. I mean, I can't just make it up. It's $30 billion. And there's a lot of Democrats that are in Congress and they hold the power of the purse. So we're going to need a bipartisan plan where we're securing the border. It's about $30 to $40 billion, but we can do that. And when we do that, we'll stop fentanyl, we'll stop human trafficking, and we'll stop the sanctuary cities, because we're going to require E-Verify for every city. And so if you can see a vision where we have a fair immigration system, where we're actually allowing people that we want to work here legally, but we also have a border that's secure, we have a strong economy that we're passing off the next generation, and you want to see us stop this endless divide we have, that's the vision I have. And if you want to be a part of that vision, vote for us, because a vote for us in that early caucus state of Iowa and New Hampshire is going to be paramount in us getting on more visibility in media. If we can sit there and say, listen, both these big narratives, the far right and this big left agenda are not, but I want to see unity and I want to see common sense, then I'm your candidate. And so if that's something you want to see, vote for us and let people know. And then we'll get attention after Iowa. And after that, we'll have a national stage that'll be unprecedented.
Republican candidate for President of the United States, Ryan Binkley. Ryan, I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you. It's great to be with you. God bless.
Thank you.